Case 4. Arun in a Conundrum. To quickly summarise the case, Arun is a professional accountant who was born in India but completed his studies in the United Kingdom and currently lives and works there. He's looking to enhance his CV and wants to get overseas experience. Due to his girlfriend being Korean and other personal interests, he sought job opportunities in South Korea. Arun settles for a large firm operating in Busan and begins email conversations about job opportunities and submits a formal application. Arun continued salary negotiations via email, but after several months of no progress, he decided to take matters into his own hand and fly to South Korea to speak in person and shore up the agreement by signing a contract. Upon arriving, Arun met Mr. Kim and his boss Mr. Lee and discovered that the job was very different to the industry norms, believing that the position they described to him was for an intern. Furthermore, the revisions discussed via email had been disregarded and there was no contract for him to sign. Arun expressed his disappointment with the job offer, and Mr. Kim believed he was not suited to the company and wouldn't be a good fit. Mr. Lee suggested that Arun had been too aggressive and forward, failing to show the company gratitude for accepting his job application. In order to salvage the meeting, Arun apologises for the misunderstanding, deciding to be less confrontational and accept criticism from the boss. Arun continued the interview, reminding Mr. Lee of his qualifications. However, they were shocked to find that he had not resigned from his current job, taking this as a sign of distrust. The meeting then turned again at the mention of Arun's future colleagues, stating they were upset at the tone of his email negotiations. This came as a shock to Arun, who expected such communication to be confidential. As the meeting ended, Arun regretted the miscommunication. Mr. Lee commented that Arun seemed to display overly individualistic personality style and would not fit in well at the company. The key stakeholders are Arun applying for the job, and we have identified various major issues within the case, all relating to a lack of cultural understanding with regards to lack of cross-cultural competence, high versus low context, power distance, individualism versus collectivism, long-term versus short-term orientation, universalism versus particularism, and neutral versus effective, which will be discussed throughout the rest of this presentation.
Cross-cultural competence goes beyond just understanding the local culture, but lies in the ability for individuals to effectively interact and communicate within the host context. The main issues encountered by Arun can be understood by looking at the different theoretical frameworks. The first relevant dimension identified by Hall is high versus low context. Korea is considered a high context culture where emphasis is placed on indirect communication and developing trust as an important first step in business transactions. In comparison, UK is a low context culture where communication is direct, straightforward, and business transactions are underpinned by legal contracts. This can be evidenced throughout Arun's interactions. First, Arun was extremely disappointed when there was no contract for him to sign, which he considered a necessity to completing negotiations, while Mr. Kim and Mr. Lee considered it merely an inconsequential detail, a mere loose end to be tied up at the last minute. This highlights the emphasis of communication and verbal contracts in high context cultures versus the need for legal and written contracts in low context cultures. Additionally, when the Korean bosses did not approve of Arun's attitude and line of response, which seemed too direct, rude, and lacking respect, Mr. Lee decided to convey his dissatisfaction through a famous Korean folk tale of the ungrateful tiger. This allowed Mr. Lee to convey to Arun how he perceived him as ungrateful as they were the ones considering his job application. It is beneficial that Arun was reminded of how his Indian grandmother used to scold him using the story so he could listen and be perceptive of the information Mr. Lee gave him. A main issue reiterated throughout the case was the perception of lack of trust and respect exhibited by Arun. This was first brought up after Arun expressed his dismay at the job offer and also after mentioning that he had not yet quit his job in the UK. To Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim, not only was trust not established from the beginning, but it seemed that Arun did not trust them in the job offer. Further research from Merkin, 2009, highlights that part of the reason Koreans engage in high context communication is reflected in their deeply rooted Confucian values and ideology, which includes allowing all participants in communication to save face if possible. Looking at Hofstede's country comparison for South Korea and United Kingdom, you can see that there are major differences in almost every category listed. This signifies the necessity for Arun to have considered these major differences before traveling to Korea. So, although there are differences in almost every category, the main ones we will be focusing on today are power distance, individualism, and long term orientation. In the next slide, you could see the differences between India and UK, and although there are some differences, they are more similar, with values such as long-term orientation being the same, and the only major difference being power difference, individualism, and indulgence. This might explain why Arun adjusted quite well to the UK culture. The first dimension discussed is power distance, where UK, a low power distance country with a score of 35, means that people strive to equalize distribution of power, whereas in South Korea, a high power distance country with a score of 60 means that there is an acceptance of hierarchical order and everybody has a place. So there is evidence from this case that suggests that Arun did not respect Korea's perception of power. First, his tone indicated that he was equal to the Korean bosses when they outranked him by several levels. Additionally, Arun talking back and stating his job was better suited for someone with lower qualifications seemed as challenging Mr. Kim's authority, where as a boss he believed he knew better than Arun for what the position required. Regarding the structure of the company, Arun had not studied the hierarchy of the company, so he did not know who was in which position and where he would have stood in the company's hierarchy. He did not have proper respect for authority and did not expect to work his way up seniority and rank. Arun, coming from a low power distance country, he did not seem to understand the organizational and power distance differences between the UK and South Korea, and this led to the Korean bosses as viewing Arun as being disrespectful with no consideration of respect for authority. The second dimension discussed is individualism versus collectivism. UK is a highly individualist culture with a score of 89. This means they stress individual goals and are motivated by personal rewards and benefits, whereas South Korea is a highly collectivist culture with a low score of 18. This means they focus more on group goals and harmony of society, as well as long-term relationships. There is evidence from this case that shows that Arun did not understand the very collective nature of South Korea businesses. First, Mr. Kim said to him, all great accomplishments in the company and in society had been group efforts. In addition, Arun did not understand why his emails were made public to the entire company staff. As well, Mr. Kim and Mr. Lee's perspective of Arun was that he did not seem like a team player, as he did not contact or ask about any of the other staff members who he was going to be working with. In addition, Arun exhibited his highly individualist nature by traveling to South Korea uninvited to speed up the process. The third dimension discussed is long-term versus short-term orientation. UK is a short-term orientation country with a score of 51, which values current traditions and social obligations and considers the present or past more important than the future, so they care about immediate gratification, whereas South Korea is an extremely long-term orientation country with a score of 100, which means they value dedication, hard work, persistence, and perseverance, and are focused on the future. This can be evidenced by the negotiations that Arun had with the boss over email. They took a very long time and months, which shows the idea of long-term orientation and focused on the future. In addition, the Korean bosses believed that Arun needed to work his way up the hierarchy, which means that they have to offer him a lower ranking job, not because they did not believe his CV and qualifications or his age, but believed that they needed to work hard and earn his rank and grow through the company.
Three relevant considerations from Chompanat's framework are achievement versus description, neutral versus effective, and universalism versus particularism. The UK is an achievement country, where jobs are earned through skill and knowledge. In South Korea, an description country, status is given based on social status or age. This is alluded to through Mr. Lee receiving his position through connections. A major point of tension is where Arun perceives his qualifications as being undermined, where his position is lower than he expected. He believed it was due to Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim not believing his resume. However, in South Korea, jobs most often start at a lower level and through commitment to the organization, promotions are given. This dimension is relevant in the scenario where Arun sent emails during his negotiations with Mr. Kim and Mr. Lee, which were displayed to all workers. The manner in which he conversed was neutral, deemed as overly direct and demanding by the South Korean employees. This is due to South Korea conducting business through the effective dimension, where it is deemed essential to communicate in a personal, friendly manner, and this demonstrates whether or not one is a team player. Being effective is seen as especially relevant to the South Korean company, where trust and respect is mentioned as a crucial part of a working relationship. Where Arun talked about his interest in the Korean culture and his connection to the country, the relationship between him and Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim improved. The UK is a universalist country, where they deem rules as applying to everyone and characterize meetings by rationalism and professionalism. In this scenario, we see Arun becomes frustrated where there is mention of no contract, as well as changes being made to his position compared to what he read in emails. In particular cultures, such as South Korea, rules are bent for family, friends, and important people. In this scenario, Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim have the authority over Arun. They deem themselves as having the power to make key decisions about the nature of Arun's employment. There are a number of things Arun could have done to further his opportunities at the company. Prior to his employment venture, he should have conducted more research into the typical South Korean business practices, such as organising a meeting rather than turning up unannounced, building rapport through email and in person prior to business dealings, and learning about Korean practices such that contracts and job presentation is a starting point rather than a final part of a business agreement, and that starting at a low-level job is typical as promotion comes through demonstration of commitment. Regarding the behaviour of Mr. Kim and Mr. Lee, their conduct is incredibly ethnocentric, as they fail to acknowledge how Arun diverges from them in terms of cultural behaviour. From a managing perspective, they need to decide whether or not Arun is a suitable match for their company. In today's society, keeping up with ever-changing and ever-growing markets is pertinent, and a way to achieve this is to accommodate people from other cultures who offer new perspectives and ideas. To ensure Arun fitted in with the company and other employees, the managers could introduce training programs and mechanisms for the staff that would inform them about cross-cultural practices and teach them to work harmoniously. On the other hand, a key consideration is the desire to maintain a competitive advantage through having a highly functioning, well-structured business. If the managers deem Arun will be a negative influence on the company in the way he works with other employees and his general attitude towards the company and his position, perhaps they should look elsewhere. As demonstrated in the Globe study with cultural clusters, it could be beneficial to look for international employees from countries more similar to South Korea, such as other countries in the Confucian cluster. The Confucian cluster is important to consider as it includes significant embedded characteristics and ideologies which inform relationships and business practices in these countries. These principles include paternalism and loyalty, respect for hierarchy, harmonious labor relationships, and recruiting based on connections. With such strong principles, accommodating people from other countries and cultures or expecting them to conform seamlessly into these practices is highly unrealistic. Also, considering the findings of Harvard Business Review, issues arise where executives assume the roles of good business are the same everywhere, and they make little effort to understand or be empathetic towards employees from other cultures. A good manager will acknowledge these differences of various employees and work to understand, compromise, and make decisions which will best benefit the organization and their global business endeavors.
Recommendations and actions for improvement. In relation to this case study, there are a couple of major takeaways for everyone, as well as any individual interested in expanding their knowledge on the topic can learn from. These are working in a collectivist culture and how everyone can learn from the experience, as well as a further understanding into cross-cultural competence, with several recommendations on how an individual can improve. It was clear from the case study that everyone was not a good fit to the team in South Korea. As mentioned, South Korea is a highly collectivist culture and everyone did not use this information to his advantage. The lack of communication when taking the initiative to travel to South Korea without an invitation shows that everyone was not working as part of a group. In a collectivist culture, working as a group along with being useful, helpful and attentive to the needs of others are the most important actions to succeed. In this case, Arun should have had much clearer communication with his potential employers. As mentioned briefly, cross-cultural competence is one's ability to understand different cultures and engage with people effectively. Having a good understanding of this can mean building trust or relationships much faster. Learning a new culture efficiently by focusing on increasing your knowledge on things that fit your interests, an individual can use this new learnt data to make connections easier. As Arun realized, coping with cultural surprises by asking questions or trying to find out why people are acting differently around you can help an individual improve their cross-culture skills. Finally, and most importantly, seek reflection and feedback. This means an individual can constantly improve their knowledge with the help of locals so their intended message can get across.